Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey. We're talking about how to stay focused and keep God's commandments and so much more this morning on The Next Right Thing with Debbie Giorgianni and Adam Blai. Good morning, Debbie and Adam.
Good morning, Keith. Happy Monday to you and all the Morning Joy listeners. And I know the chat is already going strong, so that's a wonderful thing on YouTube. But we do have the phone lines open if you'd like to ask Adam a question. I'm going to be asking him some questions that have come in recently to the spirit world. And actually, we have a mailbag edition this Saturday where we're going to dive into all of the emails and comments and answer those questions. But we thought we'd give you a little heads up, a little preview ahead of time on Morning Joy. So if you have a question to ask Adam about the work that he does on a weekly basis in the exorcism world, please call this number right now. You have less than 30 minutes to do it, so you got to go quickly. 877-757-9424. And we titled this segment for The Next Right Thing for this Monday, an Exorcism and the Rules of Engagement. Adam, why don't you quickly tell our Morning Joy listeners again, because we have new listeners each and every time we do this show. Tell all of us about what you do on a weekly basis. It happens on Fridays, and how it's kind of set up, if you will, like who's involved, how do they get involved? And then I'm going to ask you a couple questions that came in recently that I think might be of interest to our listeners.
Sure, Deb. So for coming up on 20 years now, I've been involved. I'm a lay person. I'm not a priest. I've been involved in the world of solemn exorcism in the United States, in the church across the country. And, you know, it's a long, unusual story, but here I am. So I help train priests and have since about 2005 in the ministry of exorcism, because I became kind of actually a formally church-recognized expert in this many years ago. And, you know, because bishops continue to ask me to help out, I train in our diocese. I teach at the there's an exorcism school in Chicago. I teach there usually once a year, teach at seminaries, individual cases, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, on a weekly basis, we do our sessions, and, you know, I'm typically at 3 to 4 exorcisms a week, every week of the year, in addition to, in earlier years, many, many others. So well north of 1,000, you know, sessions of solemn exorcism. I don't keep count. It's probably coming up on 1,500 or 2,000 by now. It doesn't matter. But basically, I've seen enough to have a decent sense of this ministry. And here's a let me share one thing, Deb. First off, there's a lot of interest in this area, and there's a lot of thinking that, you know, the average layperson can kind of vicariously participate a little bit, or the excitement of it all, and wanting to kind of be involved with gifts or something unusual like commanding demons, that type of thing. There's actually a bit of an unhealthy interest in this, meaning there's too much interest. It's a very private, small ministry in the church, very specialized, takes a lot of training and an appointment by the bishop to do it. So I want to bring to you and everybody else, to tie in with our overall show this morning, I would say don't get too interested in the nitty-gritty of this and spend a lot of time researching it, but here's what you can take from it. The number one thing, Deb, is that we are what? Humble, obedient, and we have faith.
That's right.
Okay, so those are the first big things, and then that we're in a state of grace. Mm-hmm. So if you can take that into your own life, because exorcism is just part of, you could look at it as a corner of the church, a corner of the faith, where the curtain's pulled back and everything's revealed, more so than in regular life. So instead of temptation, the demon's in the body and it's actually speaking, or, you know, grabbing you and wrestling with you or trying to hurt you, that type of nonsense. Don't worry about that. But the curtain's pulled back, and what do we find when we pull that curtain back, Deb? The same basics of the faith. So instead of getting too interested in exciting prayers and getting fearful of the devil and spending time reading books on deliverance, just take that piece of it and focus on Jesus, focus on the sacraments, focus on your basic Catholic Christian life is my advice. don't get too focused on exorcism, but that's what you can take from it. Humility, obedience, faith, and stay in a state of grace.
Right. So, and I have a question about being in a state of grace, but I want to give the number again in case our Morning Joy listeners would like to call in and ask Adam a question. This is your opportunity. We do this about once a month. I go over some of the questions that come in through the spirit world, and then I figured, well, you know what? Let's make sure we share this with our Morning Joy listeners. So if you have something to ask Adam about the work that he does on a regular basis, here's the number, 877-757-9424. You got to call in quickly. Adam, being in a state of grace. So I saw this recently on social media. Somebody made the comment that if you're in a state of grace, it's impossible to get possessed or to go to that level of possession. Is that true?
Well, I mean, it depends on exactly your grammar there. So let's say I'm in a state of grace and I commit a sin that pushes me out of the state of grace, and in that same moment, causes me to become possessed. So let's say I formally sell my souls, which you can't do, by the way, but you can do something where you give your body over in an explicit satanic ritual. You could go from a state of grace to possessed in one move. So in that sense, you could do it. Now, I think what the question really is if I'm in a state of grace, is the devil going to come just jump on me and I'm going to be possessed randomly walking down the street? No. The only way that would be able to happen is if God allowed it. And we see from the book of Job and also years and years of experience, God doesn't just allow the devil to do those things. We or somebody in authority over us when we're a little child has to basically make that contract with him very formally or in very deep sin. So he can't just do it. He needs the human free will to invite him.
Okay, next question that came in recently. Is it true that some people who are actually positioned for great holiness have at one point wrestled with the devil in some level of possession?
Well, some do. The devil is particularly interested in throwing roadblocks up in our lives if we have a particular calling to holiness. Like, for instance, many seminarians, they don't become possessed, but they are under extreme temptation and pressure to give up and not become priests, to the point where you would say, when you talk with people, like, wow, that's pretty strong, push from the enemy. So again, we're talking temptation, wanting to give up, and that could be human too. That could just be psychological, but they're under pressure. Saints with great gifts also go under, kind of a torment from the enemy in some cases, not all. Let's go to Padre Pio, very famous saint.
That's who
right?
Everybody uses, yes, as an example. Go ahead.
And so in his case, he was in a state of grace, but God allowed him to be tested in a very strong way. And so he was never possessed, but he was beat up by the demons physically. And, if you're scandalized by that, go back to the book of Job in the Old Testament, and you see Job as a very righteous person who loves God, keeps God's commandments, but yet God allows him to be tested. Mm-hmm. Now, on the other side of that testing, if you persevere through it, is even more grace, from God. So it's a limited test, Deb, and it's not possession. But yes, the devil's interested in messing up God's gifts that he's put into the world to be used for the betterment of everybody else.
Wow. When people come out of being possessed, are they in a much better spiritual position afterwards?
Oh, of course. Somebody who's possessed, there's great interference. They usually cannot go to Mass and participate in Mass. They might be able to stay until the consecration. They're generally going to flee at that point. They're not going to receive communion. Generally, they're going to have a really hard time with confession unless they write everything down ahead of time, because they'll just forget the sins that they were intending to confess. Generally, it's hard for them to be in churches at all. So their spiritual life is a real struggle. So yes, when they're free to do all those things. And
Gotcha.
What we see is they joyfully immediately do all those things, typically the very day, the very hour that they're totally free at the end of the case. they usually immediately go to confession, and we have Mass right there on the spot. They receive
Wow.
communion. It's a joyful time.
I was just going to say it must be like really feeling like everybody's so elated because there's such a sense of freedom there.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, tears of joy. Their face is radiant with happiness, like you've never seen anything like it.
Oh, that's incredible. Okay, we have less than 2 minutes. We're going to send it back to Keith for some announcements, but the phone lines are open if you'd like to ask Adam a question. We thought we'd give our Morning Joy listeners a kind of a head start on what we're going to be covering this weekend on Saturday on the Spirit World. We're doing our monthly mailbag. And so these are the questions that have come in. We get just an abundance of comments and concerns and questions, and we want to tackle as many as we possibly can to stay up to speed with everybody. But this is kind of a chance for you to be ahead of everyone else. So please call in if you have a question to ask Adam about the exorcism work that he does on a weekly basis. 877-757-9424. That's the number to call. You don't have to be Catholic to call in, so please pick up the phone and you'll speak to Tim. He's delightful to talk to, so please do that now. And Adam, I've got some more questions for you that have recently come in, but another one that is we really want to tap into is this idea, and you said it at the beginning of this segment, about curiosity. And so let's really talk about that, because I noticed that with all the shows that are on the cable lineup and also that is circulating on social media, there's a lot of curious people out there that find this very intriguing, and that there's a sense of, I guess, an adrenaline rush, if you will. And so let's talk about the dangers of that when we come back from the break. Sound good to you?
Sounds great, Deb.
Okay, we're going to send it to Keith for some Morning Joy announcements.
Thank you so much, Debbie and Adam. This is very interesting. I think if you ever had a question regarding the angels or demonic, it's a perfect time to call in your Monday morning here. But speaking of being on a Monday morning and maybe just talking about social media in general, are you on Facebook? And are you looking for a solid Catholic community where you can stay up to date on the latest and greatest of Catholic radio and news? Well, you want to follow and like Guadalupe Radio Network. The best way to find it would be to type it all out, Guadalupe Radio Network. And while you're at it, too, just make sure to check out Catholic Spirit Radio and Aquinas Communications as well. And while I mentioned before, there are many places that you can stream, watch, and listen to Morning Joy. But of course, did you know we can also listen to Morning Joy on Spotify, Apple Music, basically anywhere you listen to all of your podcasts at. You'll find Morning Joy, where truth matters, super easily. And we know not everyone starts their mornings at the same time, right? Some later than early, right? So it's just another way you can enjoy getting back to the basics and learning something new about our rich Catholic faith. And of course, you can always find the Spirit World there as well. But yes, coming up next, you can ask Adam a question this morning. Adam Blai, religious demonologist. If you have something about that, 877-757-9424 is the number. But until then, see you after the break. Morning Joy, where truth matters.
You're listening to Morning Joy, where truth matters.
Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and we're giving you just a little bit of an appetizer of this weekend's Spirit World with some of the most popular questions that people ask angel specialist Debbie Giorgianni and religious demonologist Adam Blai. But hey, you yourself can ask this morning right now if you've got your phone handy. The number to call, 877-757-9424. But without further ado, Debbie and Adam, take it away.
I agree, Keith. This is the last chance for our Morning Joy listeners to ask a question today about the exorcism work that Adam does. So the number again is 877-757-9424. Thanks for mentioning, Keith, that I do the angel side of things. Adam, I always joke with those folks that attend some of our talks that I have the real fun, lighthearted side of things. You have the more the heavier side. But that's the work you do. Curiosity, a lot of curiosity on social media. People are really interested, and it's become a thing to hunt and find different podcasts that can, really be so exciting about this. What do you say to all that? Because I understand some are doing quite well, and nothing against that. But for me, I don't know. I get a little bit uneasy about it because I just think like you've said before, when you heighten that experience of things, you have to keep chasing it, going for the next high on this kind of craze or fad or trend.
Yeah, so I've seen a few things over the years, Deb, and here's some conclusions after working with many hundreds of people and seeing all of this play out in various lives, both troubled people and just regular people. Number one is only learn enough to avoid the traps of the enemy and leave it at that. Because what can happen if you get too interested in exorcism and the demonic is it starts becoming the center of your spiritual life, meaning you start spending more time thinking about deliverance prayers and renunciations and binding spirits and getting into the charismatic gifts and, wondering if you can command demons around. And pretty soon, instead of Jesus being at the center of your spiritual life, you're doing everything centered around fear and the demonic. And the demonic wants to be at the center of your spiritual life. They want to put on a show, create fear, so that you stop trusting in Jesus and focus on feeling defensive about them. And that's one of their biggest things that they're doing right now. They used to more hide, the old adage, the devil's greatest trick is to convince everybody he doesn't exist. He used to hide more, but now as we're normalizing the occult and normalizing talking about this, instead of hiding, he's actually gone the pendulum swung the other way, and he's like, oh, great, talk about me more, get more fear going in people. And now, instead of trusting in God and the sacraments and focusing on learning more about their faith, they're all focused on fearing me. And that actually gets the spotlight off of God and onto him. So that would be my number one caution about all this. Secondly, here's the problem. If you do dive into it, you end up picking up a few facts here and there out of context. So the people doing this work on a regular basis that are well trained and experienced, think of it like an advanced detective, a cop who is working in undercover work in a really dangerous situation, dealing with very dangerous people, and there's a lot of coordinated support for that, and it's risky. And they may learn some things about human nature and criminals that is very specific to what they're doing and makes sense only in the context of all that support and all that training and experience that they had. And if you take just one piece of that out and think, okay, me as a regular citizen with no other training, I'm going to go out and infiltrate the local gang and I'm going to take them all down. It's kind of absurd to think about it that way. But people get excited about exorcism and deliverance. They take a piece of information out of context. They don't know what they don't know, meaning they don't realize how much they don't understand or know. They just take one snippet from a video and say, oh, that's how it is, and I've got that power, or I'm going to go do this, and this is going to happen. Very dangerous, Deb. It is really best to just learn enough to stay out of their traps and then go focus on your positive spiritual life.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why we titled the show to really focus on God today. And you were spot on at the beginning of The Next Right Thing, talking about being humble and obedient and staying getting in a state of grace, staying in a state of grace. Absolutely. And this is what we need to do rather than chasing all these other things for a little bit of entertainment or excitement. So, Adam, you talked about, we only have a couple minutes left, but you talked about the solemn rite of exorcism on a weekly basis. And you mentioned at the beginning of this, The Next Right Thing, you talked about outsiders or people thinking that they could be part of it. What if somebody does feel called to this type of work? What do they do? Call the diocese?
Well, here, it would be so difficult, Deb. So a lay person, even a priest, if a priest feels called to it, they can't just go do it. The bishop has to appoint them to do it. And generally, if somebody's too excited about becoming an exorcist and asking to become an exorcist, that's kind of a red flag. Because this is ugly, difficult work that it takes a toll on your life. Why would you want to go do this? I mean, honestly, with the things, people don't understand how awful it all is. They just don't. It would kind of be like saying, like, oh, I want to go to war and see combat and, see people get killed. And boy, the movies are so exciting. And yet the people that have gone through that have PTSD, their lives are damaged for the rest of their life. So the reality is a much higher toll than the fantasy of what it's all like.
Well, you bring up an interesting aspect of this. So have you ever encountered people or priests that going through this type of work, they have been somewhat traumatized?
Usually if that happens, it happens the very first time they walk into the room.
Okay.
And they realize in that first time that they attend a session that it's not for them. And generally, if what I've seen with priests that kind of God wants them involved in this, he takes away the fear. And it's a supernatural thing God does. It's just, it's not that you have courage and bravado and you're super bold or whatever. It's just, what you need to do, and the devil doesn't get under your skin, and you don't have that fear. And there's people that have walked in the room and they've turned to them and said something that cut to the bone. They didn't even have to physically fight with them. They've said something about their private sins. We all have bad histories. We all have black marks in our life somewhere along the line. And to have something reveal that openly to everybody in the room to shame you. Now, if it's been confessed, they can't bring it up.
Right.
But they can bring up a general trend, especially if you're still attached to that sin. They can bring up the fact that you're still attached to that sin and longing for it. Wow. So I've seen people come in the room and experience that and say, I'm done.
Yeah, that's got to be pretty shocking.
Never come back. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, these are the things you're going to be hearing this weekend on the Spirit World, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. We're doing our monthly mailbag edition. So we wanted to give you guys a head start. So we hope this helps in clearing up some of the misconceptions about the work that Adam does. But Adam, thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. And for now, we're going to send it back to Keith for the rest of Morning Joy.
Thank you so much, Debbie and Adam. Always exploring the questions that always seem to be asked, and so topical for today. And speaking of that, why do so many exorcists have a strong devotion to Mary? Well, because they have seen her power in spiritual warfare. On last Saturday's episode of The Spirit World, Debbie and Adam share how you can bring a Marian dimension to your prayer life and appeal to Mary and her virtues in your struggle with the enemy. That was this last Saturday, so just a couple days ago. So if you missed that, I highly recommend catching it. Just go to our YouTube channel or just search GRN online or search The Spirit World, and you'll be able to find it and watch. Now, Debbie mentioned as well to make sure to put on your calendar The Spirit World for this coming Saturday at 10 a.m. Central, where you can learn more about angels and demons and everything between. Because this weekend, it's the monthly open mailbag episode where they've collected a ton of your questions over the course of time that maybe they just weren't able to get to on previous episodes, but they knew they were very important for you to hear. So make sure to stay tuned for that this coming Saturday, 10 a.m. Central. Coming up next, though, we're talking with Monsignor Charles Pope live from the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., about engaging with family members and friends that are maybe other faiths or denominations. So stay tuned for that. Until then, hang tight from this break. We'll see you right here.
You're listening to Morning Joy, where truth matters.